Hey there everybody, Eric from Outer Limitless coming at you today with a look and comparison between the Streamlight TLR-1 HLX and TLR-1 HPX. You might ask yourself, well, what exactly is the difference here? Because many people, and myself included, sometimes struggle just a little bit with the Streamlight nomenclature and trying to compare one thing versus another. And at this particular point in time, with the TLR-1 platform, we do have a couple of options. Now, keep in mind the fact that each one of the numbers and each one of the codes kind of does stand for something. And so we're going to go through some of that today. And in a prior video, well, I did take a look at the TLR-1 HLX. Now, the main thing to consider here, first off, with the HLX, 1000 lumens, 15,000 Candela, and in this particular version, standard batteries. Whereas here, with the HPX, 77,000 Candela, 1300 lumens, and I have the USB rechargeable batteries. So the configurations of these lights can change, and it will vary depending on what you're trying to do. You might decide that you don't want that large Candela punch. You're going to want to go with the HLX. You might say, well, I want to have more output and higher punch. You're going to want the HPX. But with that, let's get into the details. Now, whichever model you do get, you'll get pretty much the same accessories. Not only will you get the batteries that it comes with, but you're going to get your sticker, your user's manual, some warranty information, but the more important stuff, you're going to get high and low paddle switches. Then you're going to get these keys, and these keys allow you to change the keys out inside the jaws. So in other words, the key inside these jaws, you can replace that, which will give you a different fit for different firearms depending on the spacing on your rail. And it comes with the tools that you need to do that, no problem. And so as you take a quick look here, you'll notice that each one of these I have configured a little bit different. On the HLX, I have these high paddles, and then on the HPX, kind of the mid-height paddles. So depending on how you like to rock the light, that's definitely an option. If you want to see how to change those out, I do discuss it in my HLX video. So take a look there, and that will give you the further details. Now, in terms of the general construction, for the most part, exactly the same. The body's going to look and feel exactly the same. The aluminum, the same. The housing, all the same. The jaws, your mechanism to tighten this down and, use that thumb screw and then a coin. No problem. All of that, literally exactly the same. But where the main differences come in, it is on the head of the flashlight. That's where we're starting to see the major difference. Not only does the head of the flashlight make a difference, but the batteries that you use to fuel the light also making a difference. Let's talk about the HPX real quick. So the HPX, the higher lumen, higher Candela. However, you do need to be careful because if you use the USB rechargeable SLB9 batteries, you will get more overall performance, but you will get less runtime. And in doing so, leveraging the SLB9s, you are going to get the full 1300 lumens, 77,000 Candela, 555 meter beam distance. However, this will only run for 1 hour. If you chose to use the standard CR123s, you can increase your runtime to 1.5 hours. However, you are only going to get 1000 lumens of output, 53,000 Candela, and 460 meters of beam distance. So you will definitely degrade the performance with the standard CR123s over the SLB9s. And that's also the case for the HLX. where if you use the standard CR123s, you are going to get 1,000 lumens of output, 15,000 candela, 245 meters of beam distance, which translates to about 1.5 hours of runtime. And then if you use the SLB9, the rechargeable batteries, well, at that time, you are going to get the full 1,500 lumens, 20,000 candela, 283 meters of beam distance, but it will only run for about 1 hour. So, in my opinion, and this kind of shows you why when I got the HLX, I intentionally got the HLX with the standard CR123s. I kind of was thinking I didn't want that huge amount of light. I just wanted enough to be an effective weapon light, not bounce off walls, not come back at me, have the ease of just swapping out the batteries, didn't need to worry about recharging at all, and that's what seemed to make sense. But now if we're going with higher candela, well, if it's going for higher candela anyway, why wouldn't you want the full output? So to me, you kind of need to go with the SLB9 batteries, get the higher performance once you're getting into the HPX, that sort of higher performance, the higher beam output, the higher candela. That's just my opinion. So again, keep in mind the fact that specifically you do need to think about your fuel, aka the batteries. Now in both cases, you get the batteries in the exact same way. You'll notice on the side there's a lever. You need to take this button side and kind of press it out, which will then allow the lever to actuate. Leaning that forward will then open your battery compartment. As you take a look at the head, you'll see that it is marked negative on this side. That's positive on this side. Negative, positive, and it is also marked on the side. So you can see this is coming to life. Rocking that lever, and you can press it in, and that will kind of lock everything into place. Very secure. Again, now getting on these paddles, you can see right hand, left hand side. You lean down, and that's a pressure switch, or you push it quick, and that locks the light on. You'll notice that no matter what I do, how quickly I press that button, no strobe, but this is 10-tap programmable. So you can program this to enable the strobe. So in other words, if you start from the off position, press 9 times and then hold down on the 10th, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, holding down, it now flashes. But now if I quickly press the button twice, 1, 2, you'll see that enables the strobe, activates it. 1, 2, strobe on, single press off. As I lean, again, that activates the light. Click it to turn the light on, single press to turn it off, or double press for strobe. So very simple. And then if you want to deactivate, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, leaning on the button there, you'll see that now disables that strobe altogether. So if you want the strobe, you can turn it on. If you don't want it, you can turn it off. I love that about these Streamlight lights. I'm not a big fan of strobe, so I leave it deactivated. Now remember that I said the body construction is essentially the same, but that head is going to be different. This will really matter when we talk about holster support. Now, it's going to be almost impossible for me to research all the different holster options. You got to do your research and due diligence. You have to make sure that the holsters that you get will have clearance for the additional length of the HPX. A lot of times Streamlight has been producing these more higher candela options, so it's becoming more and more regular that through time they do end up with that, HP style or higher output style head on the flashlights, and therefore companies should be addressing that, and hopefully they're kind of getting to the point where they're not limiting the ends of these like straight to the end of the flashlight. A lot of times, and keep in mind the fact that most of your holsters are going to be light bearing holsters, which means the retention for the holster comes from the actual light itself, not from the shape or size of the firearm. So, you know, that really does mean that the holsters themselves are molded to the flashlight. And so in this particular case, hopefully companies are catching on and just leaving that little extra room. Now, to be giving you guys a little bit of a data point, you know, I did want to measure the heads. So if I measure specifically the head on the HLX, I'm going to tell you, just for the sake of the argument, this is going to be a reference point at 0.71 inches. So again, 0.71 inches versus the HPX, which is 0.963, or call it 0.97. So you do have about a 1/4 of an inch difference in length between the HPX and the HLX. So now use demonstration inside, which I think is probably more realistic to the typical use for a light like this. So in this particular case here, this is the HLX. So you can see the HLX, nice defined hotspot with good flood off to the side, very round pattern, very even. But you can see that it doesn't blow out the scenery too much. So you can see that hot spot right on my door there. You know, it's actually, I got a wall of, you know, patches, and you can see that it's not completely blowing them out. So again, that's the HLX. But now the HPX, very similar, but a little more refined in terms of that hot spot. I'm going to put these side by side, and that should demonstrate it pretty well. Little bit different in terms of the color temperature and in terms of the overall intensity. And you can see you're going to have that tighter hotspot on the HPX versus the HLX. The HLX, a little bit more, I would say, broad. And again, HPX tighter. Different color temperature, which I think is interesting. I would not have necessarily anticipated that going into this. But again, as we kind of, you know, broaden things out, a little bit warmer here on the HLX, cooler on the HPX. But again, you can see that tighter hot spot, wider on the HLX, tighter on the HPX. Now, the intent of a light like this to partially blind your assailant. Here we have the HLX. Again, very bright, but you can see kind of how the lens blooms out. Now the HPX, you're going to see it a little more intense. Look at the brightness here and how wide that blooms out. Again, HLX, HPX. And so you can see that even though at first it doesn't seem like the Candela difference is that much, you can see the way that the image and the lens reacts much more. Again, HLX, less Candela, HPX, more Candela, blooming out and really blowing out the scene. Now, again, both of these going to do a fantastic job, but you get a little bit of that cooler light from the HPX, which kind of gives it the perception of brighter, but the reality is it is brighter due to the little bit of increase of lumens from 1000 to 1300, but it's really the difference of 15,000 Candela versus 77,000 Candela. It's 5 times the intensity, which is pretty interesting. Now for the outside demonstration here, this is the HLX. So the HLX here, you can see coming across my porch, off into the distance, illuminating pretty far off and then up into the trees, no problem. And then now the HPX. Again, you can see tighter hotspot, more compact beam,
and just a little more light. Now the camera probably not going to pick up the brighter aspects, but you can see if I illuminate this pine tree, this is again the HLX, and bringing the HPX into it, you can see it does increase the overall brightness. So both with a real nice beam, great quality, nice punch. Either way, can't go wrong, but I do like a little more Candela out of the HPX.
Now, just kind of an interesting observation. The HLX actually hotter than the HPX. Both of these running for just about the exact same length of time. In fact, if I took the two of these and turned them on and timed them, I'd be surprised to find out that, the HLX ran that much longer than the HPX. However, much warmer. I'm talking virtually cool to the touch with the HPX, and definitely very warm to the touch with the HLX. So I think that's an interesting fact, because heat dissipation and heat management can definitely impact the overall run times. And so to have the HPX running cooler, even though the statistics and the documentation says the standard batteries might run longer, I wouldn't be surprised to find out that the HPX actually might run about the same length overall, given the fact that it runs cooler, at least in my preliminary observations. Getting the HPX mounted now to my SIG P226. This is the P226 Legion. You can see here, definitely protruding from the front of the firearm quite a bit. However, the HLX would have as well. Keep in mind the fact the only difference, again, being the size of that head, and the size of that head only being about 1/4 of an inch difference. So you can see that the original HLX would have also protruded beyond the front of this. Now, generally speaking, for a full-size handgun, no problem. The ability to get on these paddles, fairly simple. So again, operation, very easy. Depending on what you're trying to do, you may want to go to the higher paddles. I found with this particular firearm, getting those paddles nice and high worked to my advantage. But either way you go, just a little bump there. Ambidextrous, right hand or left hand, no problem. The only other thing worth mentioning in terms of any differences between the HPX and the HLX, because this HPX is the USB version, came with that USB Type-C charging cable. But other than that, that pretty much wraps it up. So, thank you guys. I appreciate you following along. You saw the difference between the Streamlight TLR-1, HLX, and HPX. Both fantastic offerings depending on what you're trying to do. So again, if you want that slightly less lumen, lower Candela, a little bit less light, a little more floody, a little bit warmer, you can go with the HLX. Or if you want the sort of tighter beam, a little more Candela, but really the tighter beam and that cooler beam, going with the HPX. And I think more than anything, what I've gathered through looking at these side by side, really the biggest difference, quite frankly, is how wide and even the beam is for the HLX versus tight and cooler on the HPX. To me, that's the biggest difference. Rather than, calling it a difference in lumens or Candela, to me, it's really color temperature and spread that gives you kind of that vast difference between the two. The other consideration, of course, is your holster compatibility, so just be very careful. But again, thank you guys. I appreciate you following along. Thank you to the people at Streamlight who did provide this for review. And if you guys like this content, do me a favor, take a look at my Outer Limitless family of channels. You're here on Outer Limitless 2, which is the tactical and firearm side of things. Outer Limitless, which is my primary channel, hiking, camping, backpacking, outdoor gear. The Outer Limitless Blades channel, all the sharp and pointy things, and Outer Limitless lights, headlamps, EDC lights, indoor, outdoor lighting, you name it. That's the Outer Limitless family of channels. So all right, guys, thanks for stopping by. Take care now. I'll see you soon.